Hey everybody, Jon Easdon here from Anglers Covey, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Bug of the Month. It's late summer and we're on some stillwater today, and we're going to talk about damselflies. So damselflies are a really cool bug. We actually like to focus on them not only in stillwater, but even in most of our rivers as well. Damselflies are often mistaken for a dragonfly, but one key difference between the two is damselflies are very slender. Dragonflies are very bulbous in the thorax, so it's a really easy way to tell the difference between the two. Like most of the bugs we talk about in these videos, damsels are really cool. They're really unique. First off, they have about a 2 to 3 year life cycle before they become completely mature. They also have an incomplete life cycle, so it's egg, larva, and then adult. Now, damsels behave a lot differently than any of the other bugs that we talk about in stillwater and rivers even. Damselflies are pretty much a summer insect, so we're going to see them all throughout the summer. We start to see them here in South Park in June, and they're pretty solid through July, August, and even through September, depending on the weather. As long as we're having kind of typical summer weather, we're going to see a lot of damselfly activity on all these lakes. So damsels, when they actually go to hatch, they're gonna come off of the bottom of the lake and swim at kind of a 20-degree or so angle in this slow descent up to the surface. And when they get up close to the surface, they don't go completely to the surface. They're gonna travel about 1 to 2 feet below the surface horizontally, and they're gonna get to the banks, or they're gonna get to where there's a lot of weed growth. Once they reach that weed growth, they're gonna actually climb up those weeds towards the surface. Anywhere where you see weeds actually sticking out of the water, they'll go up on the stems of those weeds, and actually that's where they're gonna molt, and the adult will hatch and then fly away. One of the techniques that I like to do if I'm trying to see if damsels are active in the system is I'll find some weeds that are like, I can grab them over the side of my boat or something like that, and you actually pick up the weeds and you can see what's in there. It's pretty cool to see the amount of bugs that are actually in the substrate. A lot of times you'll pick up that handful of weeds and you'll see a lot of damsels in there, a lot of scuds, and that can kind of help you judge what flies you need to be fishing the rest of the day. Now when I'm fishing, where I'm going to actually fish for damsels in the lake, it's almost two-sided there. So damsels actually will start their descent from fairly deep. If I'm focusing on deep water, I really want to find out where that weed growth is. Once I've determined that, then I want to fish my damsels in a static indicator rig, maybe a foot or two above those weeds. That's how I'm going to focus on a deep application. One of the things with damsels is we can fish a lot of shallow water. So a lot of these shallow water bays, we can come in and almost sight fish the trout that are just cruising, and that's when I'm going to employ kind of a stripping rig with my nymphs. So on a standard indicator rig, what I can do is, usually I'll try to fish 2 flies. You can fish 3. I don't know, it's kind of personal preference there. But I can fish this rig in varying depths here. So depending on where that weed growth is, I can suspend this static indicator rig, 1 to 2 feet above those weeds. The area we're fishing right here is pretty shallow, so I'm fishing pretty shallow. As with anything nymphing, whether it's in a river or a lake, you always want to play with that depth. You're going to find the sweet spot. Here I have 2 damselflies on my nymph rig, and these are going to be at various depths of the water. One thing that I found with damselflies and fishing damsels is wind is good. You actually want some pretty heavy wind when you're static indicator nymphing. You want that to be able to move with those wind drifts. That's going to actually imitate more or less those damsels moving a little bit and then pausing, moving a little bit and then pausing. Another thing that I like to do is if it's sitting static too long, I can give it a couple strips or pop it a little bit to get some movement on those flies. we talked about static indicator nymphing. One of my favorite ways to fish not only damsels but stillwater in general is a stripping rig. This is where you can use an intermediate type 1 or 2 sink line or a hover line. So these lines, you've heard from the past, they'll sink just below the surface and they'll allow me to fish the top part of that water column. This is an excellent way to actually fish damsels, and I like to do this in a 2-fly rig. And I'll have these flies, I don't know, 3 or so feet apart. My bottom fly, I like to use a little loop knot here, so this fly has a ton of action on the back. I can do the same thing with my upper fly if I want to give this fly action. And then I'm going to have about, oh, I don't know, I'd say anywhere from an 8 to 10 foot leader system here. Now, depending on where I want to fish in the water column, I can extend or shorten that leader. So if I want to keep it really close to the surface, if I'm fishing just a few inches below the surface, actually a regular floating line is your best bet, and just make a little bit longer leader. So when we're doing this stripping technique, it's very key how we're actually stripping these flies. I want to do a crawl method or just a couple really slow strips, and then I want to pause about equal time. So let's just say it takes 5 seconds, 4 seconds to crawl those flies. I want to then pause for 4 or 5 seconds and then pick up my crawls again. The interesting thing here is when a fish eats these flies, it's going to happen on the pause or right when I start crawling it again, as soon as that fly starts to move again. These can be very dynamic takes, and you really want to make sure that when you're crawling that line, you're doing it in a motion that is going to allow you to get rid of that line really quick if you get a hookup. A lot of times these takes are very explosive and the fish just eat it and run. So if I have a big ball of line in my hand, that can bring some problems into the system for sure. So on my retrieves, if I'm just gonna strip it, I'm gonna wanna strip it about this speed. So I'm not stripping it like a streamer, and then I wanna pause. Just wanna crawl these guys very slowly. And with that hover line, my flies aren't really sinking. They're gonna stay at a certain depth, a couple feet below the surface here. Then if I'm doing a hand twist, I like to spread my thumb and my pinky out. And what's good about this system is it's gonna force me to pull these flies in kind of slower. But what's good about this is if I hook up right here, all I have to do is close my hand and that line gets out. So that's key. You want to do it in kind of a uniform manner when you're doing that hand twist. Let's speed it up here just so you can see it. Got little figure eights going there. Another really fun method to fish damselflies is actually the dry dropper. So this is a situation where I can use a big beastie dry fly that's going to actually suspend anything I put underneath it. A chubby is a very good choice. You can fish these in various sizes. And actually periodically you'll get fish that'll come up and eat these as well. Then your dropper, you can put this at various depths as well, but I'm going to focus pretty shallow. That's where I'm going to be fishing this. Where I like to run the dropper rig, the dry dropper rig, is really close to shore or amongst a lot of weeds, where these damsels are going to be in their final migration. Trout will cruise these weed lines right on the shore and pick these bugs off. So this is a really good technique if you're actually seeing fish and you want to sight fish. Big bobber won't scare them away, and a sink line won't get you too deep. This is the way to attack that really shallow depths. And last but not least, the good old dry fly. You can fish adult damsels just all by themselves as well. And I'll really focus on this if I'm seeing fish popping and rising right in the shorelines. It's a good bet if I'm seeing damsels swimming and I'm seeing damsels along those shorelines or around weeds, that those fish are actually coming up and hitting the adults. So there's a really cool pattern out on the market right now. It's one of our good friend Landon Mayer's new patterns. It's called the Chubby Damsel, and it is an adult damselfly. He ties them in both blue and green to represent both the male and female. Especially during the damsel hatches, I love to have a dry fly all ready to go. This is going to be one of those opportunities that you might not be able to do all day, but when you see it, you definitely want to be ready to execute. And here's several of my my personal favorite damsel nymphs. Start out here with a balanced damsel, and this is just a basic balanced fly that will hang horizontal in the water column with this jig hook. Next, I'll pull out the living damsel. This is a great fly that I can use static nymphing or even on the strip. Gives a lot of life with this body to the swimming motion of the damselfly. Then we have the ultra damsel, which is very lifelike. This is another good one that I like to slow crawl or strip. And then probably my number one is our good friend Landon Mayer's mini leech jig damsel. And this is a really versatile pattern as well. I love to fish it static, under a hopper, or on the crawl. A lot of damsel nymphs out there, but if you're rolling something like this, you're going to be in good shape. Good thing about all these flies is you can fish them in all three methods: as a dropper, as a static rig, or crawling or moving them through the water column. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this edition of Bug of the Month, where we were talking about damselflies. Stay tuned. We have a very special guest tyer coming up. He's going to tie one of their damsel patterns. As always, if you guys have any questions about this or anything else we do in fly fishing, be sure to drop a comment, come into the shop, ask anybody there. We're more than happy to help you. Until next time. I'm fishing that stillwater. Gosh darn, oh gee, fishing that stillwater.